This is International Master Eric Kislik, and I'm covering the round 4 game between Kramnik versus Caruana. This was a really crazy game where both sides missed wins. Kramnik played e4, which was a little bit surprising, and Caruana opted for the Petrov. And this is something that Kramnik is an expert in himself with black, and played it in World Championship matches and played it a lot in tournaments as well. And it's always interesting to see what White's going to try to play to get an advantage in the Petrov. So he played Queen e2, basically the most solid line, heading straight for a very drawish endgame that arguably gives White very slightly better chances. A line that I played myself was d4, d5, bishop to d3, with the idea of playing knight bd2. I think this gives White pretty fair chances for a small advantage as well. So let's see how the game continued. Queen e7, breaking the pin. Knight c3. All right, so they traded off a bunch of pieces, went straight for an endgame here. It seems like Caruana's setup was very simple, just to go bishop e7 and castle, whereas White opted for bishop to e3, queenside castle, and then he played rook h to e1. I assume that was his preparation, just basically to play this setup and then to basically just ask black, well, how do you want to try to equalize? So I think the simplest for black would have just been to go bishop to d7, then if knight d4, take, and d5. And because the position is so symmetrical, neither side has any weaknesses at all, the position is equal. So he opted for bishop to f6. White played a little bit too passively with knight to d2. I see what he was aiming for. He was hoping to play knight e4 and then potentially play either f4 or c4, followed by knight c3 and knight d5. But knight to d4 would have nevertheless just been the most obvious move and also a better move. In this position, White's a little bit better. For example, he can play the setup with bishop f3, take on c6, and play c4. He definitely has a space advantage here. So knight to d2 was played. Black answered rook e8, stopping knight e4. White played bishop f3, improving his position a little. And White has a pretty nasty threat of bishop to b6, trying to take the pawn on c7. So here, Black just played knight to e5, getting rid of the problem that existed along the e file. White played bishop f4, and Black played king f8. So just breaking the pin, so he's threatening to go knight takes f3. So the bishop moved, Black went c6, and White had to go back with bishop to b3, and now bishop f5 was played. So now Black is basically done with all of his development. He just needs to find a square for his a8 rook, which actually can be effective where it is in case he plays a5, which may or may not happen, but another plan that he has here is to go g5 and then to go d5, b5, and a5. He can advance all of those pawns without creating any weaknesses. So here h3 was played. This arguably is the start of problems for Kramnik. I think a much simpler move would have just been to go f3 and then to go g5. And then if d5, he can just go c4, and then there are a bunch of exchanges in the center and the position will be equal. So after h3, Black got to play g5, which was quite a good move, and then he played king to g7. So now he's preparing to go d5, and he may go g4 in the near future. So after c4, which was arguably a bad move, basically he's shutting out his b3 bishop, a better move would have just been to go f4. Take, and then if Black plays h5, the important thing is, okay, White can go knight c4, and Black is left with two isolated pawns on the king side. He doesn't have that much dynamism in his position. So after knight takes c4, bishop takes c4, d5, there's not that much that Black can do to fight for the advantage here. And White has a slightly better pawn structure. So c4 was played, and now Black got in his pawn break with g4. So White has a few options. He could go bishop takes e5. He could go bishop f4. Bishop f4 would have actually been a pretty sneaky and good move. So after takes, if he goes a5, a4, let's say bishop g6, rook e3, White is very, very solid here. So I don't think White can realistically be worse. So in the game, actually, he played knight to e4. And this was a mistake because after takes, bishop g5 check, White had a problem after g takes h3. So a lot of people ask me, why was c5 played here? Well, the problem is, if takes, Black gets to play f5 and then knight f3, and probably in his calculations, Kramnik considered this position after rook h1 and just thought, wow, this is way too passive. Now if bishop takes d6, there's knight d2 check. So I think that he was simply afraid of that. So after h4, there's knight to d2 check, and I think this is a definite problem for him. So So he played c5, which was a bad move because f5 was very strong. So now he just got to go h takes g2, take, king h8, c takes d6, and knight f3 was extremely powerful. So now the g-pawn is essentially, it's unstoppable in almost every case. For example, if bishop g1, rook e2 is winning for black. But after bishop to a4, so he sacrificed a piece, but he got to win the pawn on c6, and he was going to win the pawn on, he's going to win the pawn on g2. After rook a d8, there's a nice trick here. If bishop takes e8, there's rook takes d6. And at this, from this stage forward, the g-pawn cannot be stopped. So, so d7 was played. Rook e2 attacking the f2 pawn, takes. So now we have a very tense situation, which is going to be a race. So basically white has 4 pawns, black has 3 pawns, but black has the extra piece. If black's pawns are going to be faster than white's, he's going to win. Also, if he can win a crucial pawn, let's say he can win the c2 pawn, then black will be winning right away. So the best plan here would have been to go knight f1, which allows him to check on f2 on d2 and bring his knight over to the queen side more quickly. So after a4, we can check and then go knight c4. So now, with the knight over there, he's going to have a much easier time defending and advancing his own pawns. For example, rook g1, bishop e3, and he can play f4 after that. So knight g4 was played, and here the mistake white made is not playing c4, because by playing c4, what he would have done is he could have been able to play rook g1 and then c5, and now his own pawn becomes very far advanced, and he gets some chances of his own. So after rook c2, rook c7, rook takes c5, there's rook takes g5, which is quite a nice move. So here there are some definite tactics, but basically the point is black remains up a pawn and has pretty good winning chances. Not nearly as good as in the game, though, because black should have been immediately winning after rook takes a7, knight e3, rook g1. Here the win that he missed was simply rook takes c2. And what he might have missed is after bishop a4, there's rook f2. So rook takes g5 cannot be played because of rook f1 leading to checkmate. So h6, the problem with h6 is just that it was too slow, and we're in a tense situation, which is basically just a really fast race. So rook c7 was played. Here black played king to g7. A little better would have been to play king h7 and then to go rook to d2, and then go f4, f3, f2, and rush the pawn up the board. So king g7, a4, king f7, so he tried to bring his king over. So in the game, he opted for rook f4 on the next move, but it would have been better to just play it right away. He'd go rook f4, c3, rook g4 would have given him the counterplay he wanted even more quickly. So king e7, a4, rook f4, c3, and this was a tough spot for Caruana. He had almost no time, and he played king to d6, which was a bad move. He should have played rook g4, and then he could have played knight d5. And here he would have had chances of stopping the pawns. Probably he would have only been slightly worse in this case. So after c3, king to d6. So the simplest win for white now would have been to play rook c6 check and then a6. So if takes, he could play rook to c8. And here the idea is that he has this rook to e8 check move. So here, and then rook e8 check, and rook takes e3, wins the undefended knight on e3. So that was the tactic that was missed there. So rook to b7, rook to g4, and now black's starting to get his f-pawn in motion. Rook to e1, f4, a6. So here, black's best chance was to go f3, a7, f2, rook takes e3, but it's still winning for white after rook to b8, check, and then king to c2. So nevertheless, this still would have been winning for white. But after h5, it should have been much, much simpler for white. So he went a7, rook a8. So here, there's a choice between playing b4 and c4. Playing c4 immediately would have been stronger because he could have played c4, rook g2, b4. And then here, he could just play rook b8 and then rook takes d8. So in the actual game, after b4, h4 was played. And now, white's only win now was actually playing d8 queen with this idea of throwing in bishop c6. So this would have actually been winning for white, but he had to play it at just the right moment. So in the game, the problem is he played c4, and now after h3, his only chance again was to play d8 queen and then to check and then to go for bishop c6. But under these circumstances, black has bishop to b6. And so here, black's play is actually very, very fast. So black's in a much better situation than in the previous variations. So after c5 check, king e5, there was rook b8, rook takes a7, rook to g8. So white is threatening to go rook takes g5 check. So bishop f6 was played. And here there was a nice move that was played. d8 queen was a nice little desperado, you could say. So after rook takes g4, there's king f5, and black's threatening the rook, and he's also threatening rook a1 mate. So he had to give up the pawn. So he went d8 queen, takes, and then he took on g4. So he distracted the bishop. It was a very strong distraction. So white came back with rook g6, rook to b7. So now black is going to win a pawn back. He's going to win the pawn on b4. So after king a2, the simplest for black would have been to play bishop e7 and just take an immediate draw. He was probably playing for a win at this point when he played knight c2. So he went knight c2, rook c1, knight d4, attacking the bishop on e2. And now the safest place for the bishop would have been on g4. So we could go g4, check, and then when the bishop goes back, you can play like this with white. So after bishop h4, c6, white actually has some chances after rook a7, bishop d7. This is objectively a draw with perfect play, but over the board, white definitely has better chances. So bishop d3 was weaker, but it still should have been only a draw. So knight b3 was played, attacking the rook. And the rook could have just gone to c2. This arguably would have been simpler. Maybe just playing like this, and then, for example, if takes, then rook takes h3 could be played, and the position's only equal. So rook e1 check was played, king d5, king c2, check, king b1, knight f3. He might have missed this move. Basically, what white should do is just simply go rook takes f6. The bishop's attacked, and just go bishop f1, and he'll succeed in drawing the position after h2, rook h6. So this would have been the easiest way to draw. But instead, unfortunately, this very, very tense game between Kramnik and Caruana was ultimately decided by one single blunder. So he played rook d1, and he just simply missed that after rook a1 check, king to c2, there was rook takes d1. And now, if king takes, there's h2, rook h6, bishop h4, blocking the h-file, the h-pawn queens, and black wins. So, unfortunately, Kramnik had no choice but to play on down a piece and a pawn, and played a few more moves, check, king b1, king takes c5. Now he's down a piece and two pawns, so he could have just resigned. He kept playing through inertia. Knight d4 would have been good. He played knight e5, attacking the rook. He went for f3. If bishop takes, he plays king b4, and white's king is already almost mated. In the game, he went rook f5, and then f2 was played, and Kramnik resigned. So a very unfortunate turn of events for Kramnik, very fortunate for Caruana. It's going to be very exciting to see what happens in the rest of the tournament. If you like this video, consider subscribing. Thanks.